Hello everyone, welcome to Full Moon Movies. There are some film collections you watch for nostalgia, and then there are some you return to because they feel like windows into history, culture, and identity. Once Upon a Time in China, across these six films, feels very much like the second kind. Watching this Criterion Collection set doesn't feel like revisiting just a martial arts series. It feels like stepping into a cinematic retelling of a China struggling to define itself in the shadows of change. The first film opens what is almost a classical setup: East against West, tradition against intrusion, discipline against chaos. But what's interesting is how Tsui Hark doesn't treat this purely as a grim historical drama. There's comedy here, there's romance, there's melodrama, and then there's sudden explosive action. Now, that tonal mix is part of what makes the film feel alive rather than academic. You are actually watching a society under pressure, but through characters who breathe, joke, stumble, and fight. Jet Li's Wong Fei-hung enters this world not as a flawless legend, but as a moral center trying to hold things together. The British and American presence isn't just a background decoration. In fact, it represents a class struggle and a power struggle, with foreign influence pushing into Chinese society, while local corruption and opportunism eats away from the inside. The film builds towards that unforgettable gun versus fist finale, which isn't just a spectacle, but it's a statement. Tradition and identity are literally being tested against modern force, and somehow Sui Hark makes this both thrilling and strangely emotional at the same time. The Criterion restorations of the first film really lets you appreciate how ambitious it was. The scale, the choreography, the way comedy, drama, and action are constantly in conversation with each other. It's no surprise that this film cemented Jet Li as a generational star because his performance isn't just athletic, it's disciplined, restrained, and deeply grounded in character. The second film takes a fascinating turn. Instead of focusing mainly on foreign pressure, it turns inward towards the dangers of unchecked nationalism and extremist belief. The White Lotus section isn't just a villain group, but they represent something more deeper. The way fear, theology, and identity can turn into violence when a society is under stress. What's striking here is how this mirrors real historical patterns, not just in China but across Asia, where belief systems and clan based ideologies migrated, evolved, and in many places, they still exist today in different forms. Wong Fei-hung's struggle in this film isn't just physical, it's philosophical. He's caught between resisting foreign domination and rejecting blind fanaticism. The way the film shows this fight for the middle ground is through both speeches and combat, through moral choices such as martial ones. And of course, Donnie Yen's appearance as his rival brings a new level of intensity, turning their confrontation into one of the most memorable clashes in the entire series. Yuan Wo Ping's choreography here is pure electricity, but again, it's never just about movement, it's about ideas colliding. Now, by the time we reach the third film, the series shifts its gaze again, now this time towards Beijing and the heart of the empire itself. The Empress Dowager Grand's lion dance competition becomes more than a spectacle, it's a performance of national pride under foreign pressure. Here, the Middle Kingdom isn't just a setting, it's a symbol. You can feel the film actually is trying to say something about image, power, and cultural confidence in a world where China is being watched, judged, and challenged from all sides. The lion dance sequences are some of the most visually striking in the entire series. They are colorful, dangerous, and almost operatic in scale. But underneath that pageantry is a quieter anxiety, the sense that culture itself is being put on display, tested, and measured. Add in the espionage subplot and the political tension around protecting key figures, and the film becomes a celebration of tradition that's also aware of how fragile that tradition feels in a changing world. Taken together, that these three films already show that makes Once Upon a Time in China so special. They're not just action movies for me. They are actually reflection on history, belief, identity, and power, told through feasts, lion dances, rival schools, and public spectacles. Now, the fourth film marks a transition with a new director, new action choreographer, and Vincent Zhao stepping into the role of Wong Fei-hung. The tones actually shift. The comedy and romance are dialed down, and the focus moves more towards relentless, almost wall to wall action. The Red Lantern sect introduces yet another variation on the theme of nationalism and extremism, and once again, a lion dance competition becomes a stage for conflict. The film feels a more leaner, tougher, and more physical, especially in its gravity-defying set pieces, like the fight across collapsing planks. It may not have the same thematic elegance as the earlier entries, but it adds a raw, muscular chapter to the saga. The fifth film brings Sui-hag back to the director's chair, and with him comes a return to a more playful adventure tone. Here, the threat comes from pirates exploiting the chaos created by foreign invasion, turning political instability into personal profit. The film leans harder into spectacle and entertainment, mixing traditional kung fu with acrobatic gunplay in a way that feels almost like a bridge between classic martial arts cinema and the bullet ballad style that would later define so many Hong Kong action films. It's lighter in theme, but still very much part of the same world, a world where order is fragile and opportunities are always waiting. Now, across all these films, one thing becomes really very clear. Once Upon a Time in China is really a collection of histories wrapped in stories. Not every story is equally deep, but some episodes feels flatter, more episodic, or more focused on action than ideas. But what never really feels flat is a cultural background for me. The world becomes stories inhabit of the rituals, the politics, the tensions between belief systems, and the pressures of imperialism that struggle to define identity, which is always feels rich, alive, and meaningful. Now that's why, taken as a whole, this series feels bigger than its individual parts. Wong Fei-hung isn't just a character, he's a symbol moving through different historical anxieties, trying to hold onto a moral clarity while the ground keeps shifting beneath him. The Criterion Collection release really understands this, with 4K restorations on the first three films, new restorations of the later entries, and careful attention to the original sound mixes. These films finally get the presentation they really deserve. The inclusion of Once Upon a Time in China and America adds an interesting footnote to the journey, showing how the legends travel beyond its original cultural space. And then there are the extras, interviews with Sui-hag, Nansun Shui, Marco Mark, and Tony Raines, archival material with Jet Li, documentaries about the real Wong Fei-hung, features on Yuan Wo Ping's choreography, and essays that place these films in both historical and cinematic contexts. Now, this isn't just a box set, it's an archive. In conclusion, even if some individual entries don't hit as hard as others, the series as a whole stands as something really rare, a popular action franchise that also functions as a cinematic reflection on history, culture, and identity. Once Upon a Time in China isn't just about how well someone can really fight, but it's about what that fight really means in a world being reshaped by power, belief, and change. As a collection, this is absolutely a must-have, not just for martial arts fans, not just for Jet Li fans, but for anyone who loves cinema that carries history inside its stories. Now, Once Upon a Time in China, the complete series, is a must-have.